The Wonka Bar. Invented by Willy Wonka, named the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there's ever been, Wonka bars are the creamiest and loveliest chocolate you'll ever taste. They use chocolate mixed by waterfall, labor by Oompa Loompas, and come with a branded Wonka top hat on the label to guarantee quality. At least, that's what Roald Dahl, author of the 1964 children's book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, would have you believe. When I was a kid, although we had plenty of Disney movies and cartoons at home, I liked to watch the same 3 movies over and over that my family owned on VHS. Among these top 3 was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the 1971 film adaptation of Roald Dahl's book. There was something about the opening sequence of chocolate making, the displays in the candy store, and the packaging of the Wonka bars themselves that always made me desperate to try Wonka candy. Well, luckily for me and all the other kids who felt the same way, I found out later on that Wonka bars did exist in real life, along with an entire line of Wonka candies. But the introduction of the first Wonka bar wasn't exactly as celebrated as you might think. Despite initially having Roald Dahl on board as the screenplay writer for the 1971 film, the production of the movie soon took a more commercialized turn. More and more members kept being added to the film crew, and against Dahl's wishes, they made more and more changes to his original book and screenplay. Eventually, Roald Dahl would go on to disown the film, unhappy with things like Willy Wonka's overshadowing of Charlie as the main character and the musical score. With Dahl's disownment, the film's team continued to make changes for what they hoped was a more commercial success, and at one point opted to bring in the Quaker Oats Company to help finance the film. And why would an oatmeal company want to finance a children's movie? To gain the right to use the Wonka name to sell candy bars, of course, just like from the film. Product placement is the deliberate incorporation of brands and products into media like movies and TV shows. It can range from subtle to obnoxiously apparent, but it's everywhere. The companies that produce the movies and TV that use product placement get additional funding and payouts for the sponsorship, so it's of course in almost every piece of media that exists. Reverse product placement, though, is when a recognizable brand or product from a movie or show is produced and put out into the real world. Things like Reptar bars from Rugrats, Duff beer from The Simpsons, and Bertie Bott's every flavored beans from Harry Potter have all made their way off the screen and into the hands of fans of the franchises. Wonka bars are a prime example of this, but given that the creator of the Willy Wonka character and story ended up not wanting anything to do with his first movie adaptation, this didn't exactly create a prime market for real-life Wonka bars. The Quaker Oats Company did produce a Wonka candy bar just a month before the movie's release, but due to production and formulation issues, they were quickly recalled and never actually saw store shelves. What did get a full release to consumers, interestingly, was a Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory candy making kit, a cereal box prize offered by Quaker Oats with proof of purchase. Cereal box prizes were a huge thing during this time period. I made a video about them and cereal culture in general if you want to hear more about them. While the candy making kit did include chocolate molds and wrappers to make what resembled a Wonka bar, there was no chocolate or chocolate making ingredients included in the kit, so the candy from the movie was still a far-off dream. And with the movie disowned by its creator and a recalled candy bar, the journey of the real-life Wonka bar wasn't off to a great start. Well, the rights to the Wonka name were still in the hands of outsider corporations, and despite the movie only seeing $4 million in box office sales, the Wonka bars still managed to make a return by 1976. These were the first fully produced and shipped Wonka bars. I found some conflicting information when searching this timeline. Some people say that the first Wonka bar was a graham cracker dipped in chocolate, while there are others that cite old wrappers and say that Wonka bars were originally bars of different flavored taffy. Whichever came first, these bars were intended to live off of the Wonka name and appeal to the fans of the movie. 2 other candies from the book and film, the Everlasting Gobstopper and the Scrumdiddlyumptious bar, were also released in the 70s. After undergoing a few different ownership and name changes, all while still making candy along the way, the Wonka brand was eventually bought by Nestle in 1988. Candies like Nerds and the Wonka Exploder were now products of the Willy Wonka Candy Company. But while the fictional Willy Wonka was creating candy and commercial success, Roald Dahl was still disappointed with the film adaptation of his novel. He would die in 1990 while companies were using his character's name for profit. This, of course, didn't sit right with the rest of his family, and in 1998, the Dahl estate created an agreement with Warner Bros. To produce another film version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This time, however, the Dahl family would have total artistic control and could guarantee it would be a movie that Roald would be proud of. This new take on the movie would sit in waiting in production for years before Tim Burton eventually picked up the project as director and cast none other than Johnny Depp as one of the main stars of the film. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, released in 2005, can't exactly be measured up to Roald Dahl's specific critiques, but considering his family and estate owners were in charge creatively, we can assume this movie is the superior adaptation. Compared to the 1971 film, Tim Burton's version includes more accurate depictions of the story, with Charlie's dad being alive and working at a toothpaste factory, Veruca Salt being assaulted in the nut testing room, and the kids all being seen, although altered, leaving the factory instead of just subtly being implied to be dead in a chocolate river somewhere like in the first movie. There were still some choices that didn't align exactly with the book, but this is a Tim Burton movie after all, so I guess the Dahl family worked with what they could get. To promote the new movie, 5 Wonka products, including a Wonka bar, were packaged with a golden ticket just like in the movies and book. If found, a golden ticket would award its finder to a grand prize unique to each Candies ticket, like a European vacation or a trip to a fantasy sports camp, whatever that means. And for winners who wanted to ditch the elaborate sweepstakes and just get their hands on some cash, each ticket could also be redeemed for $10,000. So these prizes weren't quite a lifetime supply of chocolate or an entire chocolate factory, but I'm sure you could buy something close enough with that amount of money if you wanted. With $10,000, you could buy at least 50 of those premium Ferrero Rocher chocolates that must be wrapped in real gold, because why else would they cost so much? 2005 was a good year for the Wonka brand, with tons of new candies, a new film to bring recognition back to the Wonka name, and of course, a golden ticket promotion to rake in sales. But there's still one question. Did Wonka bars even taste good? In every adaptation of the story, Willy Wonka is credited as being a master inventor and maker of chocolates with the most delicious candy and logic-defying creations. In the book, it's actually quoted exactly that Willy Wonka is the most amazing, most fantastic, the most extraordinary chocolate maker the world has ever seen. And as for the candy, each new chocolate bar invented is far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything the other chocolate factories can make. Clearly, there was a bit of a reputation to live up to. But Nestle's everlasting gobstoppers didn't really last forever, so did the chocolate based on a secret recipe mixed by Waterfall live up to the expectations of fans either? While the Waterfall was probably obviously out of the question, chocolate makers have clearly proved over the years that you don't need a chocolate river to make it taste good. As for Nestle's Wonka bars though, they probably could have benefited from the extra help. My memory of Wonka bars after first discovering them in a gas station convenience store, of all places, is that they were mediocre. I was excited and even confused to see them sitting beside the likes of Hershey and Crunch bars because I didn't know Willy Wonka made real candy you could eat. I also remember feeling disappointed that the purple packaging looked nothing like either movie's depiction of the wrappers, but that obviously didn't stop me from trying it. I'd watched the 1971 movie dozens of times. This surely had to be my new favorite chocolate bar. Despite the hype and familiar Wonka branding on the packaging, the Wonka bar I had back in the 2000s wasn't exactly what dreams are made of. I think this review of the Wonka bar written in 2005 sums it up pretty well. Cheap, waxy, and average. I've always been more of a gummy or sour candy kind of person, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I think I would have been better off buying the Crunch bar off the shelf instead of the Wonka bar because they tasted pretty much the same. They're both made by Nestle, so it makes sense. Remove the crunch from the Crunch bar, call it something else, and you've got easy reverse product placement. But didn't they know the Wonka name that they were tarnishing in the process? It was really disappointing as a kid. I remember thinking that Charlie and the rest of the WCU, that's Wonka Cinematic Universe, were pretty dumb for thinking that this was the best chocolate in the entire world. There were a few other real-life adaptations of candy referenced in the movies, but the majority of products made by the Willy Wonka Candy Company were able to stand on their own without comparison to the stuff in the WCU that fans rave about. With a starting point of Scrumdiddlyumptious, other candy that was made followed a similar naming trend with Nutty Crunchilicious, Mud Puff Caramel Stuff, and Mysterious Spit Spat Bar, all existing as chocolate bars. And I get why they'd use such colorful words to try and match the classic Wonka nomenclature, but I feel like this just gave consumers more ways to be let down. If I ate something called Whipple's Scrumptious Caramel Delight, I would expect it to taste as good as the name implied, not something that tasted like a cheap rebranding of existing candy. Although, in the opinion of some people, Nestle's Wonka didn't quite get the chocolate right, there was still an entire candy line that was sold alongside it. As a sour candy lover, I definitely preferred the other fruity candies over the chocolates, with Laffy Taffy, Sweet Tarts, and Pixie Sticks being among my favorites. There's nothing quite like the feeling of dumping pure powdered sugar in your mouth from a soggy paper tube. Fun Dip was another powdered sugar Wonka creation that I usually saw in the goodie bags given out at birthday parties. Among other products like runts and bottle caps, I have to say that I think Nestle did a decent job at emulating the unique and sometimes strange nature of Wonka candies that were mentioned throughout the story. I mean, in both movies and the book, the Golden Ticket winners take a tour inside the chocolate room that's filled with edible grass, candy daffodils, and trees that grow gummy bears. Comparing that to candy that makes rope and bottle caps, of all things, look appetizing, I'll give Nestle credit where credit is due. But as we covered, these products weren't actually mentioned in any iteration of the Willy Wonka story. What was being done to sell the Wonka products beyond just the Wonka name? As seems to be common for the early 2000s, they made some flash games, of course. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory existed as both a 1985 ZX Spectrum game and a 2005 game for pretty much every popular console of the time. These were both probably alright, but I spent a good amount of my time as a kid playing the real Wonka classics. I'm sure there were plenty of sites that hosted these games, but I was a frequent user of Primary Games myself, so I'm mainly going to be talking about that site as it's where I got my Wonka gaming experience. The earliest release of a Willy Wonka themed game on Primary Games was in December 2004. The 2005 film came out in theaters in America on July 29th, so it seems that the team behind Willy Wonka PR was planning ahead. The first 12 games in December 2004 ranged from basic to unique, with a good handful of games being blatant ripoffs of existing games like this Laffy Taffy Triss, that's just a Tetris clone, and Runts Collector, a Willy Wonka themed bubble popper. One game I remember pretty clearly is Laffy Taffy 3D Pyramid Challenge, a game clearly centered around Laffy Taffy as the player collects keys in various flavors of the candy and wears a branded shirt. The Wonka relations kind of end there, though, as the main goal of the game is to wander through an underground cave maze, brandishing only a cool explorer's hat and a flashlight. The thing about this game that's particularly stuck with me is the really eerie vibe of it all. The tunnels of the maze are dark and make it feel like you're wandering in a forgotten, cursed tomb that you definitely are not supposed to be in. The background track has a creepy, mysterious feel to it as it plays while you explore. And the small flashlight you carry is the only source of safety, helping illuminate the Laffy Taffy flavors that appear on the walls throughout the maze. When finding and collecting a flavor key, there's a cheesy joke waiting to be revealed, and if the punchlines weren't scary enough, each time a joke is uncovered, there's this really creepy laugh track that plays to emphasize the laffy part of the taffy. I don't know if it's a bug or a feature, but these laughs also play throughout the maze even when not picking up a key, so that doesn't exactly make things feel less sinister. And to make matters even worse, the scariest part of the game are the big, red, 3D rendered troll creatures that are also scouring the maze and just waiting for you to run into them and shit your pants. What they actually do is just look menacing and eat some of the essence of light from the player's flashlight before letting you go. Obviously, it might look pretty goofy and non-threatening now, but when I played this as a kid, I was convinced that this was top-tier horror and mostly avoided playing this game. Oompa's Outrageous Rush was another, a lot less terrifying, favorite of mine on the site. In this game, you play as an Oompa Loompa modeled after the 1971 version of the character. After falling asleep on the clock, it's your job to collect all the pieces of the new Oompa's candy before Willy Wonka comes back and takes the fee out of your paycheck. This is a run-of-the-mill platformer, though it does feature a bit more in terms of the WCU, with a character directly from the first movie and a candy factory that's just as wacky and wild as in the stories. More games would be added to primary games over the years, eventually being collected in their own Wonka Games category and amounting to a total of 34 themed Flash and Shockwave games on the site alone. Through Flashpoint, an archive of old games that died with the discontinuance of Adobe's Flash Player in 2020, there are a total of 44 games listed as being developed by Wonka, so there were clearly more games out there that didn't appear on primary games or weren't archived through Flashpoint. Interestingly, though the majority, if not all of them, were developed around the release of the 2005 movie, most of the games feature imagery from the 1971 movie, with a Willy Wonka resembling a curly-haired Gene Wilder and orange Oompa Loompas with green hair. The games that didn't feature elements from the WCU instead were named after and centered around specific candies for promotion. Sweetheart's 3D game, clever naming there, and Donut's Rush Hour Racer are just a couple of examples of games featuring Wonka products with goals of collecting the candy for a higher score. As a kid, I didn't think anything of the existence of these games. I knew the movies and the franchise and was just glad to be playing games at all, especially ones that were centered around candy. But in hindsight, it is just a little bit weird that there were, first of all, games that were so heavily pushing a reverse product placement brand. I'm sure there were Flash games for anything you can think of, but I personally never saw any games where you rode on a Skittles roller coaster or raised a Hershey-themed pet. And second of all, I find the sheer quantity of Willy Wonka-themed games to be also a bit on the strange side. 44 games is a lot for any one theme or franchise, though I guess Wonka got away with it a bit more easily by changing up each game with a different playstyle and candy-centric theme. Since the fall of Adobe's Flash Player, these games have all disappeared off the internet, with Flashpoint and other archives like it being the only place to play these weird, nostalgic anomalies. In recent years, Zynga, the creator of classics like Farmville and Words with Friends, has created yet another, more modernized Willy Wonka-themed game. It's called Willy Wonka's World of Candy and functions as a match 3 game similar to Candy Crush, featuring more imagery of Gene Wilder's version of the character. I knew that the 1971 movie was usually regarded as the better of the two movies, but it's a little weird that out of all of these games, the Tim Burton film still gets overlooked almost every time. I couldn't tell you if any of these games, particularly the early Flash games, helped to drive up sales at all, but given the other experiences I've had with sites and games of the same nature, I think it's safe to assume that they helped to keep the Wonka candy line going. But even Sweet Tarts eating lizards and Laffy Taffy trolls in the dungeon couldn't stop the Willy Wonka brand from eventually being dropped by Nestle in 2017. Citing poor sales for the change, Nestle renamed the entire brand to Nestle Candy Shop, and candies previously made by the Willy Wonka brand had the Wonka name erased from the packaging. Some products were cancelled altogether, like the original Wonka Bar, along with most of the other chocolates. I definitely remember having the sudden realization one day when picking up some Sweet Tarts that, wait, weren't these a Wonka product? And weren't Nerds and Pixie Sticks and all the others made by Wonka too? It definitely felt like a Mandela effect moment, but obviously, though the change was relatively quiet, the existence of the Wonka brand is still easy to find, even if it's no longer around currently. Despite the discontinuance of the Willy Wonka Candy Company, the existence of so-called Wonka bars is still fairly prominent. These Wonka bars are clearly not officially licensed, but use the success of the book and movies, as well as the previous candy brand, to sell to fans who still want to be able to buy Wonka bars just like from the story. There was a trend of fake Wonka bars being sold in 2013, but since then an even bigger resurgence has been reported in the UK as of 2022. The Food Standards Agency, a food safety and public health department of the UK government, even issued a warning that fake Wonka bars were being sold in the UK. Although it sounds a little silly, there was a real danger to these bars as they didn't include proper allergy or nutrition information, with allergens like nuts being present in the candy despite not being present on the label. Hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of fake Wonka bars have been seized by city councils and police and are likely still being seized to this day. Despite the controversy and missing rights to use the Wonka name, you can find fake Wonka bars to buy pretty easily just through a quick search online. The majority of them seem to use the packaging style from the 1971 movie and sometimes include their own golden tickets or even small-scale golden ticket promotions, with prizes being candy store credit or another Wonka bar for free. Scammers are around too though, and some people have received questionable chocolate with golden tickets that are actually just pieces of yellow paper, or with golden tickets missing entirely. With all the ups and downs from oatmeal companies to fake Wonka bars, the story of the Willy Wonka candy line is kind of messy. But with the demand for a scrum-diddly-umptious candy still being apparent, the lovers of the WCU and the classic Charlie and the Chocolate Factory story will continue to stop at nothing to get their hands on a chocolate bar worthy of the Wonka name. Maybe all of these fake and unlicensed products will result in some kind of comeback for the brand, with Wonka bars that Charlie Bucket himself would be proud of. As of right now though, these knockoffs and the candies removed from the Wonka's namesake are the only remnants we have left of one of the most notable reverse product placements to ever come about. We'll just have to wait and see if and when the next Willy Wonka business venture will take off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go eat some Sweet Tarts ropes and watch Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory for the 86th time.